The house was quiet again. It always was these days. Only the slow creak of the old wooden clock broke the silence every few minutes. The sound of time, steady and cruel, reminding her that life outside still moved, even if her world had stopped years ago. Margaret brushed the dust off the table with the edge of her sleeve, careful not to disturb the single chair that sat at the corner, the one no one ever used anymore. It was his chair. Her son's, the one he left behind when he decided he was done with this small town, this small life, and maybe even her. Every morning, she brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one that she never drank. It sat there beside that empty chair until it turned cold, like ritual, like prayer, like hope pretending to still be alive. The sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, landing gently on the tablecloth she had stitched 20 years ago. The same morning light used to fall on his face when he'd rushed down the stairs, late for school. Shoelaces untied, hair messy, calling out, "Mom, where's my backpack?" She smiled faintly, remembering how he'd always forget something, his homework, his lunch, his jacket, but never forgot to hug her. Before leaving, it had been 15 years since that last hug. 15 years since he stormed out of the house after a fight neither of them could take back. He was 20 then, angry, ambitious, and convinced the world owed him something. She was stubborn, scared of losing him to the same recklessness that had taken his father years earlier. Words had turned sharp that night, and love had turned into silence. He left before sunrise. No goodbye, no note, no call. Margaret spent the first week waiting by the window, then the first month waiting by the phone, then the first year writing letters she never sent. Now, she just waited without expecting. The neighbors stopped asking about him after a while. Boys leave, they'd say kindly, "He'll come around," but he never did. His name, Ethan, became something she whispered to herself like a secret. Every corner of the house was heavy with memory. The dent in the wall from his teenage skateboard accident, the faded photographs on the mantel, the graduation cap still tucked away in a box she couldn't open. Sometimes, when the nights grew long and her heart grew louder than her thoughts, she'd sit in front of that empty chair and talk as if he were there. She'd tell him about the weather, about Mrs. Jones next door who'd broken her leg again, about the dog that wandered into her yard last winter. It didn't matter that no one was listening. The talking helped her breathe, until one morning, something changed. A letter arrived. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the name on the envelope made her heart stutter. Ethan Collins. She froze, hands trembling. The letters blurred for a moment before she tore the envelope open, eyes racing across the page. It wasn't from him. It was from someone named Lily Parker. "Dear Mrs. Collins," it began, "I'm sorry to write you like this. I don't know if you remember me. I met Ethan a few months ago. He spoke of you often, though I don't think he ever found the courage to call. I thought you should know. Ethan passed away last week." The words stopped her breath. Her knees weakened and she clutched the edge of the table for balance. The coffee cup toppled, spilling dark liquid across the lace cloth, soaking the space beside the empty chair. She didn't feel the burn on her skin, only the cold spreading through her chest. The letter continued, "He had been living in Chicago. We worked at the same diner. He was quiet, kind, and often tired. He once told me he wished he could go home, but he didn't know how. He kept a photograph of you in his wallet. I thought you should have it. It's enclosed." Margaret's shaking fingers found the small photograph tucked inside. It was worn and creased, edges curled, but unmistakable. Her and Ethan smiling on the porch, summer light on their faces. His arm around her shoulders. Her tears fell onto the photo, blurring the colors. She couldn't remember the last time she had cried like that. The day blurred into night. She didn't eat, didn't move, didn't sleep. She just sat there, staring at the chair, her heart whispering all the things she never got to say. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said softly into the silence. "I'm sorry I didn't understand. I'm sorry I made you feel like this house wasn't home. I just wanted to keep you safe. That's all I ever wanted." The old clock ticked. The air grew colder for the first time in 15 years. She set another chair across from his, and she began writing, not letters she'd never send, but one she hoped would find him somehow, wherever he was. "Dear Ethan," she wrote, "you were right. I held on too tight. Maybe love isn't about holding, but letting go and trusting they'll come back. I wish I had known that then." Her words trembled on the paper, ink smudged by tears. As she finished the letter, she looked at the photo again. Behind their smiles, she noticed something she hadn't before. The shadow of that same chair on the porch, empty even then, waiting. She smiled faintly through her tears. Maybe some chairs are never meant to be filled again. Maybe they just remind us of who once sat there, and the love that never really left. That night, she placed the photo beside the empty chair, lit a candle and whispered, "Welcome home, my boy." The flame flickered once and stilled, as if the house itself exhaled after holding its breath for years. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the window like footsteps leaving, Or maybe returning. And for the first time in 15 years, Margaret slept with peace instead of waiting. Asterisk the rain had started just before sunset, tapping gently against the old kitchen window. Margaret sat at the table, the candle burned low beside her, and the unopened envelope from Lily lay where she had left it that morning. She couldn't bring herself to read the rest yet. Some truths you have to walk around before you can face them. The chair across from her remained empty, but the space beside it had changed. The photo was there, the candle beside it still flickering softly, like a heartbeat refusing to die out. Finally, she reached for the envelope again. There was a second sheet inside, one she hadn't noticed before. A longer letter, folded neatly, written in a different handwriting. Athens, her breath caught. The ink was faded, the lines uneven, as if he'd written it in a hurry or through shaking hands. She began to read. Hey Mom, if you're reading this, it means I didn't find the courage to send it. I wrote this months ago, maybe longer, I'm not sure. Time feels strange when you keep running from yourself. I know I hurt you. I know I left in a way no son should. I thought I was proving something, that I could make it without you. That I wasn't just some small town kid. But all I really did was make both of us lonely. The truth is, I thought about you every single day. I kept that old photograph in my wallet because it reminded me of who I was before I got lost. I'd look at it when things got hard, and they got hard a lot. You were right about so many things, Mom, about the kind of people I was hanging around, about how pride can destroy you quietly. But I was too proud to admit it. I work nights at a diner now. It's not much, but it's honest. The owner's kind. There's a girl here named Lily. She reminds me of how you used to talk to strangers like they were friends. She says I smile like you. I don't know if that's true, but it made me laugh for the first time in a long while. I've been meaning to come home. I've packed my bag 3 times already. But every time I look at the bus ticket, something in me freezes. I keep hearing that last argument we had, the words I said that night, the things I can't take back. You told me one day I'd understand what love really means. I think I finally do. It means showing up even when you're scared. It means forgiving. It means writing letters you might never send. If I make it home, I'll bring your favorite apple pie, the one from Miller's Bakery. And I'll sit in that old chair again, love. Ethan. Margaret held the paper close, her tears falling freely now, tracing the faded ink until it blurred. For years she had imagined him angry, careless, gone, but this letter was proof he had never truly left her. She folded the letter carefully, as if it were something fragile and alive. Outside, thunder rolled far away, and the rain softened into a quiet drizzle. She imagined Ethan sitting alone in that diner, the sound of dishes clattering, the smell of coffee and oil in the air, the weight of regret pressing against his chest. Her heart ached to have been there, to tell him that nothing he could have said that night was stronger than her love. The next morning, she decided to write back. Not to mail it, she had nowhere to send it, but because some words deserved to be answered anyway. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, the pen shaking in her hand. Dear Ethan, I read your letter, my darling boy. I wish I could hold your face and tell you it's okay. You were just young and scared, and so was I. You didn't have to prove anything to me. You were already enough the moment I first held you in my arms. I was so afraid of losing you that I forgot to let you live. Every day you were gone, I prayed you were safe. I cooked your favorite meals even when there was no one to eat them. I talked to your chair because it felt like maybe you could hear me somehow. Maybe you did. You always said the chair creaked when I sat too fast. I think it misses you too. I found your photo and I lit a candle. I hope wherever you are, there's light, warmth, and peace. You said love means showing up. Maybe this is me showing up now, love, Mom. When she finished writing, she placed the letter beside his. Two voices, separated by years, finally side by side. The house seemed to exhale, soft, lighter somehow, as if for the first time Lily saw Ethan. He was sitting alone in the corner booth of the diner, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. It was a late winter morning, sunlight sliding through the blinds and thin, tired lines. She'd been working there only a week then, learning how to balance trays and fake small talk with strangers. But something about him felt different, quiet, heavy. Like he was always half here and half somewhere else. He came every morning, always ordered the same thing, black coffee and apple pie, one slice, no whipped cream. He never looked at the menu, never looked up much either for the first few days. She didn't talk to him except for polite questions. But one morning, when the diner was empty and the radio hummed softly in the background, she finally asked, You always order the same thing. You must really like apple pie. He looked up at her then, really looked, and smiled. Small and sad. It reminds me of home, he said. She didn't ask more. But every day after that, she noticed how his eyes softened when she brought the pie, as if the smell alone took him somewhere far away. Weeks passed. He'd started helping around the diner sometimes, fixing a loose chair leg, changing a flickering bulb, stacking boxes in the storeroom. He wasn't paid for it, but he did it anyway. Said it made him feel useful. Lily learned that he lived just a few blocks away, in a small apartment above a mechanic's shop. That he used to take photos once, back when he thought life would turn out differently. That he didn't like birthdays. That he talked about someone named Margaret but never said my mom, he said her. She guessed what that meant. One night, when the snow fell heavier than usual, the last customer left early. The two of them stayed behind to clean up. The radio was playing an old song, one Lily's grandmother used to hum when she was small. Ethan was wiping the counter when he suddenly said, "You ever regret something so much it follows you everywhere?" She looked up from the coffee pot. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think everyone has one thing they wish they could undo." He nodded slowly. "Mine's not a thing. It's a person," he told her then, "not everything, but enough." About the fight, the silence, the years that passed like a punishment. About a mother who loved him enough to argue. And a son who loved her too much to admit he was wrong. When he finished, he laughed. Hollow but honest. "She probably doesn't even remember me anymore." Lily smiled softly. Mothers don't forget their children. They just wait longer than anyone else would. He looked at her then, as if her words had cracked something open inside him. After that night, something changed. He started talking more, not much, but enough. He'd bring her a cup of coffee during her shift. Leave little notes on napkins, "Don't forget to smile." Sometimes he'd sit by the window during her break and tell her stories about his childhood. The lake behind their old house. The dog they once had. The creaky chair on the porch where his mom would sit every evening. He laughed when he said it. Creaked so loud you could hear it halfway down the street. It was the first time she saw his smile reach his eyes. Then one morning, he came in later than usual. He looked pale, worn out, like he hadn't slept in days. He sat in his usual booth, but he didn't order anything. Just stared out the window, hands trembling slightly. "You okay?" Lily asked. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I finally wrote her a letter," he said quietly. "I don't know if I'll ever send it, but I had to write it." She smiled. "That's a start." He looked at the paper again. "I'm going home soon. I've been saying that for years, but this time I mean it. I bought a ticket." Lily's heart lifted. She'd seen the change in him, the way he started to hope again. The way he looked at life as if it might still give him another chance. "I think she'll be waiting for you," she said. He smiled, small and real. "I hope so." That was the last morning she saw him alive. When he didn't show up the next day, she thought maybe he'd already left. Maybe he was finally on that bus, finally going home. But later that week, his landlord came into the diner holding Ethan's old jacket in a small box. His voice broke when he said there'd been an accident, a car that slid off the icy road. A driver who didn't make it. Lily didn't speak for a long time after that. The diner felt colder, the air heavier. She found his photograph in the box, an old picture of him and his mother, both smiling in a way she'd never seen on his face before. She couldn't just throw it away. She couldn't let him vanish like he never existed. So she found his mother's name on the back of the photo, searched for her address and wrote that first letter. Now, months later, she sat in her apartment, holding the reply Margaret had sent, a letter filled with forgiveness and love, written in handwriting that trembled with age but glowed with warmth. Lily read it over and over until she knew the words by heart. "I was so afraid of losing you that I forgot to let you live," she cried that night. Not for herself but for both of them, for a mother who waited too long, and a son who never stopped trying to come home. The next morning, she decided to visit. She didn't call, didn't write ahead. She just packed a small bag, took the first bus out of town, and carried the letter with her. The road stretched quiet and long through the countryside. Fields blurred past the window, gold and green under a soft afternoon sun. As the town sign appeared, "Welcome to Havenbrook," she felt her throat tighten. When she reached the little white house with the blue shutters, she stopped at the gate. The air smelled like rain and apple blossoms. The porch looked just like the photo, the same table, the same lace curtains fluttering inside. And there, near the corner, she saw it, an old wooden chair, slightly tilted. Its paint faded by years of sun. Margaret was sitting beside it, hands folded in her lap, eyes closed as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Lily hesitated, then slowly walked up the path. "Mrs. Collins?" Margaret opened her eyes, startled at first, then calm. She smiled softly. "You must be Lily." Lily nodded, voice trembling. "I'm sorry to come without calling. I wanted to see the place he talked about." Margaret's eyes glistened. "He talked about it?" "All the time," Lily said, sitting down beside her. "Especially this chair." Margaret let out a small laugh, one that sounded half like a sob. "He always said it was the noisiest thing in the world." They both sat quietly for a while. the sound of the wind moving through the trees around them. Then Lily reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, Ethan's bus ticket. He never got to use it, she whispered. But he really was coming home. Margaret took it gently, her fingers brushing the edges like it was something sacred. He made it, she said softly. Maybe not the way we wanted, but he made it. The sky above them turned gold as the sun began to set. The shadows stretched long across the porch and the empty chair glowed in the warm light. Quiet and still, for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Margaret said, "Would you like some coffee?" Lily smiled faintly. "Only if we make 2 cups." Margaret looked at her, eyes wet but full of peace. Always two, they went inside together. 2 women bound by love for the same soul. The air in the house softer now, lighter, as if the silence that had haunted its walls for 15 years had finally learned how to rest. Outside, the wind brushed against the porch again, and the chair creaked once, gently, like someone had just sat down. The morning sun fell gently through the kitchen window, lighting the old table in a warm golden hue. 2 cups of coffee steamed quietly beside each other, their scent filling the air with something that felt almost like comfort. For the first time in 15 years, Margaret wasn't alone at breakfast. Lily sat across from her, hands wrapped around her cup, smiling softly. She'd arrived only a day ago, but already it felt like the house had been waiting for her. Margaret watched her carefully, the way she looked around the room, as if memorizing every small detail. The photographs on the wall, the creaking floorboards, the lace curtains swaying with the breeze. There was something about her presence that didn't feel like a stranger's. It was gentle, familiar, like a memory walking back through the door. They didn't talk much at first. Words weren't necessary. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, filled with quiet understanding. After breakfast, Lily offered to help with the garden. The old roses had grown wild, climbing the fence in tangled vines. Margaret watched from the porch as Lily knelt down, trimming the stems, her hair catching sunlight like strands of gold. "You remind me of him sometimes," Margaret said suddenly. Lily looked up, smiling softly. "He said that once, that I reminded him of you." The words settled between them, warm and bittersweet. Margaret sighed, her gaze drifting toward the porch chair. "He used to help me out here every summer. He'd complain about the heat, the dirt under his nails, but he'd always stay till we finished. Then we'd sit right there, share lemonade, and he'd talk about how he'd see the world one day." Lily set down the pruning shears. "He did see the world, I think. Maybe not the way he planned, but he saw it, in people, in moments." Margaret's eyes glistened. "You sound like him too." Lily didn't know what to say, so she just smiled and kept trimming the rosettes. The day wore on. Margaret brought out a box of old photographs. They sat together on the porch floor, flipping through memories, birthdays, school plays, beach trips. Ethan's laughter frozen in time, he used to say.
The days grew softer after Lily came. The house no longer echoed with silence. Instead, it hummed gently with the sound of laughter, footsteps, and life returning after too long. The garden bloomed again, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and morning coffee, and Margaret found herself waking up each day with a reason to move. One morning, she stood by the window, holding Ethan's journal in her hands. The pages were worn, the ink faded, but his words still spoke, clear, tender, full of life. She turned to a page she hadn't seen before. It read, "If I ever lose my way, I hope someone reminds me where home is." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She traced the letters with trembling fingers, her eyes glistening with tears. Later that day, she found Lily sitting by the porch, sketching the garden. Margaret joined her, setting the journal down between them. "He wrote this when he was 16, she said softly. "He was just a boy then, already dreaming of the world. But I never thought." Her voice broke before she could finish. Lily placed her pencil down. "He used to talk about you, you know. He said you were his home. Even when things got bad." Margaret looked up, her face filled with disbelief. "He said that?" Lily nodded. "Every time he felt lost, he'd look at this photo." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn photograph. "This one. The 2 of you at the lake." He kept it in his wallet. Margaret's trembling hands took the picture. She hadn't seen it in years. Ethan's arms around her, both laughing, water sparkling behind them. She could almost hear his laughter again, could almost feel the sun on their faces. "He never showed me this," she whispered. "He didn't need to," Lily said gently. "He carried you everywhere." Tears streamed down Margaret's cheeks as she clutched the photo to her chest. The ache in her heart shifted, softer now, no longer sharp. That evening, as the sun sank low, Margaret sat at the old writing desk by the window. The same desk where Ethan had done his homework, scribbled poems, and written dreams. She pulled out a piece of paper, her pen trembling slightly as it touched the page. She began to write, "My dear Ethan, I used to think goodbye meant the end. That once you were gone, all that was left was silence. But I was wrong. You're still here, in the creak of this floor, in the garden you helped plant, in every sunset that finds me. I spent so long wishing I could change the past, but maybe I just needed to forgive it. And forgive myself. I'm sorry for the things I never said. I'm sorry for holding on to the anger when I should have held on to you. You deserved more kindness from me, and I hope you found it in the world. I hope you found peace, love always, Mom. Her hand lingered on the last word, Mom. She hadn't written that in years. The ink blurred as her tears fell onto the page. She didn't wipe them away. When she was done, she folded the letter carefully, tied it with a small ribbon, and placed it in Ethan's journal. Then she took the journal outside, where the garden glowed under the moonlight. Lily followed her quietly. Sensing the moment was sacred, Margaret knelt beside the rose bush, the one Ethan had planted when he was 12. The flowers were in full bloom, their fragrance heavy in the night air. She buried the letter and journal beneath the soil, her fingers pressing down gently. Do you think he'll read it? She whispered. Lily smiled softly. I think he already did. They stayed there in silence for a long while, the night wrapped around them like a soft blanket. Crickets sang, the wind whispered through the leaves, and above them, the stars flickered, faint, patient, eternal. When they finally went inside, Margaret stopped by the empty chair. For years, it had been a symbol of everything she'd lost. But tonight, it didn't look empty anymore. The candle flickered softly beside Ethan's photo, and for the first time, she smiled at it, not with pain, but with peace. She whispered, Good night, my boy. The next morning, Margaret woke early. She brewed 2 cups of tea, one for herself and one for the chair beside her. It was silly, maybe, but it felt right. As she sat, sipping quietly, Lily joined her. You're up early, she said. I wanted to say good morning, Margaret replied. Glancing at the photo, Lily smiled gently, understanding without needing words. Later that day, they decided to visit the lake, the same one from the photograph. The path was overgrown, the wooden dock faded with age, but the water still shimmered in the sunlight. Margaret stood at the edge, the breeze tugging at her hair. She closed her eyes, letting the sound of the waves wash over her. He loved this place, she said softly. He said the world felt bigger here. Lily placed her hand on Margaret's shoulder. Maybe he's here now, in the wind, in the water. Margaret smiled faintly. Then I'll visit him often. They sat together on the dock, feet dangling above the cool water. Margaret took a deep breath. You know, I never thought I'd laugh again. But yesterday, when you burned those pancakes, I laughed so hard I cried. Lily chuckled. Ethan always said I couldn't cook to save my life. He wasn't wrong, Margaret teased, her eyes glimmering with warmth. For the first time in years, they both laughed freely, loud, honest, unguarded. The sound carried over the lake, mingling with the wind. When they returned home, Margaret placed a small vase of fresh roses on the table beside Ethan's chair. Beside it, she left a single slice of apple pie. He always wanted dessert first, she said softly. That night, as she prepared for bed, she noticed the candle by his photo had burned low. Just before the flame went out, it flickered, once, twice, like a tiny wave goodbye. She watched it with a gentle smile. Good night, Ethan, she whispered. The house was quiet again, but no longer lonely. It was filled with echoes, laughter, forgiveness, love that refused to fade. In her dreams that night, Margaret saw him standing by the lake, waving. He looked just as he did before, young, bright, full of life. He didn't speak, but his smile said everything. When she woke in the morning, tears wet her pillow, but her heart was light. Downstairs, Lily was already making breakfast. The smell of pancakes and coffee filled the air again. Morning, Margaret said softly. Morning, Lily smiled. I was thinking, maybe we could turn the garden into something. A place for people to remember those they've lost. Margaret's eyes softened. A garden of memories. Yes, Lily said, her voice hopeful. For everyone who's loved and lost, and learned to love again. Margaret looked at her, warmth flooding her chest. He would have loved that. They stepped outside together. The sunlight was golden, the air crisp. The roses glistened with dew, each petal a soft reminder of love that doesn't end. It transforms. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to the wind, thank you for sending her to me. A soft breeze brushed her cheek. Like a mother's kiss, like an answer, and for the first time, the empty chair inside didn't seem empty at all. It seemed full. Full of laughter, forgiveness, and love that finally found its way home.
It was spring again in Havenbrook. The air carried the scent of blooming lilacs, the sound of birds returning after the long winter. The garden behind Margaret's house was alive, bright tulips, new roses. Soft grass where morning dew shimmered like tiny pearls. Margaret stood by the porch, her hands resting on the wooden railing, watching Lily carefully paint a wooden sign. The young woman's hair swayed in the soft breeze as she wrote each letter with care. When she finished, she lifted the sign proudly and turned toward Margaret. The Garden of Memory. Lily read aloud with a smile. What do you think? Margaret's eyes glistened. I think it's perfect. They placed the sign at the entrance of the garden. Beside the path of white stones Ethan had laid down years ago. The sunlight spilled over it, warm and gentle as if blessing the space. Within days, neighbors began to visit. Some came quietly, leaving small flowers, photographs, or letters. Others simply stood in silence, letting the wind carry their thoughts away. The garden became a sanctuary not just for grief, but for love that never truly ended. Margaret often watched from the porch, a gentle smile playing on her lips. The once empty house was now full of people, full of laughter, full of life again. One afternoon, as the garden buzzed softly with visitors, a young boy approached Margaret. He couldn't have been older than 12. He held a single white rose in his hand. Is it okay if I leave this here? He asked timidly. Of course, Margaret replied warmly. Who's it for? He looked down at his shoes. My dad. He used to tell me stories every night. I miss him. Margaret knelt down beside him, her voice soft. Then you're in the right place. You can tell him anything you want here. He'll hear you. The boy smiled shyly, placed the rose beneath a rose bush, and ran back to his mother. Margaret stood there for a moment, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. This was what Ethan would have wanted, a place where people found peace. Later that evening, when the visitors were gone, Lily found Margaret sitting by the empty chair again. The candle flickered softly beside Ethan's photograph. Do you ever get tired of talking to him? Lily asked gently, taking a seat beside her. Margaret smiled faintly. No, some conversations don't end, they just change. Lily nodded, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the candle. I used to think grief was like drowning, she said quietly. But now I think it's more like learning to breathe again, just differently. Margaret looked at her, tears glistening. You've grown wiser than I ever was. Lily laughed softly. I had a good teacher. They sat in silence for a while, the ticking clock filling the room with its steady rhythm. Margaret reached out and took Lily's hand. You've given me something I never thought I'd find again, she said. A reason to keep living. Lily squeezed her hand gently. You gave me something too, a home. The room grew quiet, heavy with meaning. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of roses and fresh soil. That night, Margaret dreamed again. But this time, it was different. She saw herself walking through the garden. The air shimmered with golden light. At the far end of the path, near the old oak tree, she saw him, Ethan, standing there, smiling. He looked just as he had the last day she saw him, eyes bright, hair messy, that familiar dimple on his cheek. But there was something peaceful about him now, something light. He waved at her. She wanted to run to him, but her feet wouldn't move. Instead, he called out softly, You did good, Mom. She felt her heart swell. I'm sorry I wasn't there, she said through tears. He shook his head. You are now. Then the light around him grew brighter, softer, until he faded like sunlight at dusk. When Margaret woke the next morning, her pillow was wet with tears, but she was smiling. For the first time, the ache in her heart didn't feel like pain. It felt like love that had found a new shape. She went downstairs and brewed 2 cups of tea, setting one beside the empty chair as she always did. The candle flickered once, as if greeting her. Good morning, Ethan, she whispered. Lily entered the room moments later, her hair messy from sleep. You're up early again, she said, rubbing her eyes. Margaret smiled. Couldn't sleep. The birds were too loud. Lily laughed softly. I think they're just happy. Maybe, Margaret said, looking out the window. Maybe they are. They ate breakfast together, the morning light spilling across the table. The empty chair sat quietly between them, no longer a symbol of loss, but of love, of continuity, of memories that breathe even after hearts stop beating. Later that afternoon, they went back to the garden. A small crowd had gathered again, people bringing flowers, lighting candles, sharing stories. Among them was the young boy from before, reading a letter aloud to his father. Margaret and Lily stood side by side, listening. When he finished, the boy looked up at the sky and smiled. Lily turned to Margaret. He's helping people heal, even now. Margaret nodded, her eyes full. He always had that gift. The 2 women walked along the path, pausing by each small tribute, photos, letters, candles, toys, all tokens of love. When they reached the center of the garden, Margaret knelt down, pressing her hand to the soil above Ethan's letter. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. The wind stirred gently, brushing against her hair. It felt almost like an embrace. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Margaret held a cup of tea, Lily a small notebook she'd started writing in. What are you working on? Margaret asked. Stories, Lily replied. About people. About loss. About finding light again. Margaret smiled softly. Ethan would have liked that. Lily looked at her, her voice tender. I think he's the reason I can write them. Margaret leaned back, the wooden chair creaking beneath her. Then keep writing. Let the world hear him through you. They sat together until the sky turned deep blue and stars began to appear. The first fireflies danced across the garden, their light flickering like small souls finding their way home when it was time to go inside. Margaret paused by the door, glancing once more at the empty chair, but this time, she didn't whisper goodbye. She smiled because she knew now love never leaves. It just changes its seat. The candle's flame flickered once more, soft and golden, before settling into a calm, steady glow, and in the heart of that small, quiet house in Havenbrook, there was peace.